Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. It's pretty obvious why this time of year is made special in northern latitudes. This is when the sun is coming back, just past the solstice. Buddhism arose in northern India, and all the Theravada countries today are in the tropics. So there's really very little attention paid in Buddhism to the solar seasons. The Buddhist calendar is a lunar calendar. That's why feast days like Wesak move every year, is because they're fixed to a lunar cycle. The psychological impact of the light coming back is felt very strongly by people living in high latitudes. The importance of light as a spiritual factor and symbol is, however, very much evident. It's used as an important metaphor in many places. Consciousness is said to be luminous, abhisara, and particularly awakened consciousness is described as boundless, without footing, and luminous. The intrinsic nature of the citta is light, that which reveals, that which illuminates. When someone attains to awakening in the suttas, one of the statements they often make in praise of the Buddha's teaching, they say it's as if someone had taken a lamp into a dark place and illuminated that which was hidden. During the Buddha's life, on all the great occasions of his life, beginning with his conception, the entry into the womb, and then his birth, his leaving home, his first sermon, or his awakening, then his first sermon, and then his passing, his parinibbana. In all those climactic life moments, there was a great light that appeared in the cosmos and illuminated the 10,000 world systems. This is part of a long list that occurs in the commentaries of miraculous events that happen at those moments, such as trees bursting into fruit and flower out of season, people being miraculously cured, and many other things. But the central motif, and one that's mentioned in the oldest text, is the brilliant light that fills the cosmos. And it's said that this light penetrates even to the dark spaces in between the worlds, the interworld spaces where beings that are born there, this is a kind of a hell existence, is the interworld hell, where the suffering is through cold and darkness and loneliness, because they don't realize that there are other beings in the universe. They think they're all alone in a dark, empty space. And then when there's a brief illumination of this space, they say, oh, there are other beings that dwell here. The Buddha himself was said to at times emanate 5-colored rays of light from his body, like a luminous halo. This is the origin of the Sri Lankan Buddhist flag, which we've got some samples around here someplace. It's kind of a 5-color rainbow flag. This is the Sri Lankan Buddhist flag that represents the 5 luminous radiations from the Buddha. the idea of light has a implication on all phases of the path in terms of morality, of ethics. Kama is divided into those deeds which are bright and have a bright result, those which are dark and have a dark result, those which are both bright and dark, and those which lead beyond the kama, which leads beyond kama. So the symbolism of bright and dark is quite obvious. Wholesome kamas lead one towards the light, and unwholesome kamas falling back into darkness. Darkness is one of the weapons of Mara. Confuse the minds of beings with darkness. One of the manifestations of this is sloth and torpor, the dullness, heaviness, and sleepiness of mind. And one of the principal ways the Buddha recommends to combat sloth and torpor in meditation is perception of light, meaning that one brings to mind in the imagination a brilliant light. You're sitting in light. You know? This is something of a very practical nature for meditators to bear in mind when meditating in the wintertime. Here, and anywhere in the north, it does have an advantage in that it's very quiet, it's very peaceful, and there are no insects. But it has a disadvantage of this shortness of the daylight, and on cloudy days, even in the day, it's kind of darkish. And if one is not careful, this can have a psychological effect in tending towards sloth and torpor. Something just to be aware of. It's nothing you can directly do about it, but to be aware of that and to not succumb to the effect. And if one feels oneself becoming dull and sleepy, then it can be helpful to follow the Buddha's advice and conjure up a perception of light. Light is one of the kasina objects that can be used as a focus of meditation. And there are some meditation teachers who I'm thinking of Ajahn Lee and his tradition. He's developed a system of meditation that involves using the visualization of light. Ajahn Lee was a Thai forest master who spent some time in India, may have been influenced by Indian yogic traditions. And part of his meditation is a very complex kind of meditation of moving the breath around the body. And part of that is to visualize a ball of light that begins in the center of the skull, and you move it down through the chakras to the belly, then back up to the heart chakra and hold it there. And other teachers, both within and without of the Theravada tradition, have used the visualization of light in different ways. Tibetan tradition makes a big central theme of various kinds of light meditations, and they talk about different color lights, the red light and the white light, and then they come together in the clear light, which is considered to be the highest form of light, blending the red and the white. It's a curious idea that I come across in one Tibetan book, that the clear light is spontaneously experienced. It can be developed in meditation, but it's spontaneously realized naturally at different times, and in order from the briefest and most insignificant to the strongest. It arises at the moment of sneezing, at the moment of orgasm, at the moment of falling asleep, and at the moment of death. There's a brief flash of the clear light. I think the most important use of light as a spiritual symbol is of the chitta, or consciousness, or awareness. The knowing mind is symbolized by light, because light is that which reveals, and it's the function of chitta to know, to experience. And that brings up the old Zen story that I have quoted before, the two monks discussing the nature of mind, and one says it's like a bright mirror in a high place that illuminates the 10,000 things, and they are reflected in the face of the mirror thereby. And the other one says that's close, but it's not correct. The nature of mind is like a bright mirror set up in the high place, and it illuminates the 10,000 things, but nothing is reflected into the face thereby. So in this conception, that the chitta is not in itself affected by that which it knows. It knows all things, but is not self-affected by them. There's a sutta where the Buddha is talking about the nature of the liberated mind, and he says if you imagine a building with an open space, a window on one side, and a brick wall on the other side, as a beam of light comes through and strikes the wall. But if you remove the wall, what indeed does the light beam strike? Well, this is from a Theravada Sutta, but it sounds very Zen-like in its as an allusion towards the nature of the liberated mind. We have to be somewhat cautious with concept of light or illumination, radiance, not to be over attached to it. This is something that Ajahn Mahabua warns about in one of his last and most important discourses, was Arahata Magga Arahata Pala, where he talked very openly about his attainment of arahantship. It created quite a sensation in Thailand when this came out. And he spoke about in his own practice coming across this brilliant radiance and sitting in it for a long time, and thinking that this indeed is it. This is the unconditioned. This is full liberation of mind. So there's nothing here but this brilliant light. But then he finally came to the conclusion that the light itself was the last trick, or the last manifestation, probably more accurate, is not to ascribe to it an agency, but just to say the last manifestation of avidya, or ignorance. And by releasing from his attachment to the brilliant light, he was able to fully enter into nibbana, or the unconditioned. Thinking about this imagery, of light as the last manifestation of avidya, we can also visualize the existence of sentient beings in a similar way. If we imagine the cosmos of beings is illustrated by a series of concentric circles, I think the very center, the still center, is the unconditioned. And the brilliant light is just outside of that clear center. And as we go further away from the center, things become more diffuse. Just as light goes through a prism, breaks up into its separate colors, as we go further away from the center, things become more complex, more differentiated, more diverse. Whereas the closer we get to the center, the more uniform, the more clear, the more simple, the more pristine things are. It's like the conditioned realm gradually frays towards the edges. Now think of a tree or a bush, getting from a one solid trunk spreading out into smaller branches and tinier twigs, just kind of fraying at the edges. Further away from the central trunk, there is much more complex and easier to become lost in the tangle. The beings who dwell closer to the center are described as being luminous, bright, and they can be differentiated by the quality of their light. When we consider the Brahma beings as a very strong parallel to states of mind in jhana, and it can reveal to us something about the nature of jhana and help us understand that, the beings of the second Brahma plane, equivalent to the second jhana, they are the Abhisara beings, or the bright beings. And the prominent quality of second jhana is piti, or rapture, or this excited happiness, thrilling happiness. And the luminosity of these beings is said to flicker like a torch. Whereas the third level jhana beings are associated primarily with the jhana factor of bliss, sukha, or like a steady, clear, oceanic kind of a happiness. Not exciting or thrilling, but all-pervading and still, calm, but blissful. And their luminosity is said to be steady like that of the sun or the moon. And light is, of course, associated with the eye. This is the necessary quality for the visual consciousness to arise, is that there be an eye experiencing light. This is what the eye knows. What stimulates the sensitive tissue of the eye is visible light. Electromagnetic radiation in a narrow band that we call visible light stimulates the sensitive tissue, the rods and cones of the eye. And then the visual consciousness sees color and shape. They talk about in the Pali text, besides the physical eye, the mangsa chaku, the fleshy eye, there's also the various other eyes that are mentioned. There's a deva chaku, which is one of the, actually it's dibba chaku. Dibba is the adjectival form of deva. The dibba chaku is the divine eye, is the psychic power whereby one can see things that are far away or remote, or one can see into other realms, such as ghosts and devas and things. And this is done not with the fleshy eye, but with the divine eye, the dibba chaku. There is the Dhamma eye, the Dhamma chaku, which is spiritual power or quality of seeing into a new aspect of reality. And this is the synonym used for stream entry. It's sometimes called the opening of the Dhamma eye, as one has glimpsed the unconditioned, which is not seen with the ordinary eye, but with the eye of the mind. It's open to see the unconditioned. And one has entered into the stream, becomes a sotapanna. And this is said to be the opening of the Dhamma eye. And there's the Buddha has all these various powers and more combined in the Buddha chaku, the Buddha eye. And it's in some of the stories, it says that the Buddha saw, for example, he sees with his Buddha eye that such and such a person in such and such a place is ripe for the Dhamma, meaning that they'll just need a little push to realize stream entry. So he goes to this place and gives a talk or seeks this person out. In one of these stories, which is quite a charming story in the sense of showing his transcending of caste prejudice, is one of the examples. He saw a fellow who was a chandala, an untouchable, was working as a sweeper, which is one of the tasks given to the untouchables. They'd do all the dirty work, basically. And he was sweeping, and the Buddha saw he was ready, so he went to that place and announced he was going to give a talk, and people gathered. And he just sat silently, and people wondered what he was waiting for. He was waiting for this fellow to finish work. And then when he finished work, he went and sat at the back of the hall. The Buddha began speaking. And the whole reason for him to be there was that one fellow who was just ready. So these various other kinds of eyes are types of visions, in a sense, metaphorically speaking, beyond the physical vision of the ordinary eye. And the ordinary eye, the fleshy eye, works with the faculty of perception. So these other kind of more advanced kinds of vision also work with the faculty of perception, the perception of some reality. And this is always something to be borne in mind, that any impression, any knowledge we have of the outer world is partial, and it depends on various factors. It depends on the strength or quality of our eye. People can be nearsighted or farsighted or colorblind. There's limitations on the quality of the eye itself. It depends on the light. You can perceive more in the light than in the dark. It pertains to the external objects. And finally, it depends on the quality of perception. Our sense impression of the outer world is always partial, incomplete. Our perception has only that to work with. So it's pretty important not to fall into what's called naive realism. Not to assume that what you see and what you hear is the be-all and the end-all of reality. Reality is something that we only have a sliver glimpse of. And our perception can be more or less accurate. We can be quite fooled in our perception. We know this from optical illusions. It's quite easy to misperceive things. So this raises the difficult question of what is real, and that's a question that can't be easily answered, if it can be answered at all. But I think the most important thing is to fall back on the Buddha's position of approaching everything from a practical side of what is good for our practice, what leads us out of darkness, what leads us towards the light, what reduces suffering and increases knowledge. This is what's important, not metaphysical speculations about ultimate reality. And where this comes down, where the rubber hits the road, where it comes down into practice is in our meditation. If we're doing vipassana exercise, we're attempting to be present with the immediate experience. So we're trying to experience reality just at this moment, just as it is, with this clear, penetrating vision, vipassana, the clear seeing. That's kind of the V prefix is a kind of sense of cutting, of penetrating. Like we're trying to clearly see the present moment. Yeah. And this is something that we can do. We can approach closer and closer, and we can actually do it, knowing the reality at the present moment, the subjective reality. And never mind what the objective source is, but the subjective reality at this moment is a sense impression or a feeling or a thought form. At this present moment, there is some object of consciousness. And we try to be clear about that and parse it down to its ultimate bedrock reality of experience at this moment. And this is, for practical purposes, this is reality. This is as real as it gets. And this is what we can experience as things in their own nature. It's the mind taking an object. This is outside of any kind of metaphysical theorizing, which can be fun to do, but it's not ultimately of any value. So the subjective, immediate reality is what our mind is experiencing at this moment. And to go back to this metaphor of light, this can be experienced in the meditation as kind of like a strobe light, that moments are experienced discretely. There's a clear luminosity of this moment, and then the next moment. And this is what leads us beyond the conditioned, because we're experiencing the conditioned in its most fundamental, primordial form without elaborating it, then the attachment to it begins to weaken, because we're seeing it in its own nature. We're not dressing it up. We're not gussying it all up to go out. We're, it's just as it actually is at this moment, right now. And it's not so alluring, nor is it frightening. Now, this is what keeps us bouncing around, is fear and fascination. This is what samsara throws up at us alternately. We're fascinated by this, and we're terrified of that, and it kind of pulls us and jerks us, and we end up spinning around and losing it. But if we look real close, okay, what am I fascinated by? What am I afraid of? We look real close and break it down to its kind of atomic structure of this moment right here, right now. See, there's nothing to be fascinated by, and there's nothing to be afraid of. It's just more stuff. And it's all conditionally arisen, impermanent, shifting, changing, without substance. There's nothing there. Well, what am I making a deal of it for? And then you can loosen your grip and become free. So I think I'll stop there.